Chloe Denton's fingertips tingled from hours of piping royal icing, yet she still held her breath as the judges made their final circuit around the long, fragrant table that filled the Frosted Falls fire hall. 12 entries glimmered under strings of coloured lights, gingerbread recreations of the town's historic district. Holiday music drifted above the crowd, cinnamon mixed with pine, and cameras from Channel 6 hovered, eager for the traditional moment when the top ribbon was awarded. Chloe shifted her weight, cracking the stiffness in her knees. 2 years earlier, she had drafted blueprints for skyscrapers. 40 stories tall. Now she sculpted sugar glass windows for cookie cottages. After a burnout that scorched her love of concrete and steel, baking had offered the cool balm she'd needed. Today's entry, a perfectly scaled model of Frosted Falls' old railway depot, was her comeback. She smoothed a strand of caramel-coloured hair behind one ear and studied Judge Harold Meeks, who leaned forward to sniff the gingerbread courthouse crafted by rival baker Dana Quince. Dana flashed Chloe a syrup-sweet smile, as if the two hadn't spent the week trading barbed compliments about fondant facades. Meeks tapped his scoring clipboard and announced, "Let's have the entrants step behind their displays. I'll tally the sheets, then present the results." His voice carried a quaver earned from 30 years as town treasurer and 10 as chief gingerbread adjudicator. He never rushed. He demanded perfection. Chloe slid behind her depot, discreetly wiping a dot of powdered sugar from the awning. Her best friend, sous chef Louise Halkett, handled the last-minute blowtorch pass to give the sugar glass a golden tint. He whispered, "It's flawless. Quince has nothing on that." Chloe nodded, though the nagging nerves of her former profession resurfaced. Calculations racing, measurements dancing, the intangible dread that one error could topple everything. It was just candy, she reminded herself, but show a building to Chloe Denton, and she saw structural loads, stress points, fatal weak lines. Habits were hard to frost over completely. Judge Meeks reached the end of the table. He inhaled, lifted the mic, and blanched. His cheeks drained of colour like icing left in the snow. He wobbled, flailed for balance, and fell forward with frightening slowness. The hall gasped as the portly man crumpled directly into Dana Quince's gingerbread courthouse. The delicate cookie columns shattered, scattering peppermint pillars. Royal icing snowflakes puffed upward in a sweet explosion. Meeks lay face down in rubble, clipboard skewed, moaning once before falling silent. Pandemonium erupted. The chamber smelled now of fear beneath sugar. Dana shrieked. Someone dialed 911. Mayor Francine Cobb hustled forward, demanding space. Louise tugged Chloe's sleeve, but Chloe's gaze was on Meeks's lips, blue at the corners, and the odd, glistening crust smearing the edge of his mouth. Not icing, she thought. Gel? Paramedics arrived within minutes, wheeling the judge out. The crowd thinned, sirens doppled away. And just like that, Frosted Falls' twinkle-lit tradition lay in wreckage. 2 hours later, Chloe, still wearing her flour-dusted apron, sat in the municipal office along with the other competitors. The sheriff, Bennett Reich, stroked his grey moustache behind a desk, strewn with sugar-dusted evidence bags. "Mr. Meeks is in critical condition," he said. Doctors found a fast-acting paralytic in his system, not enough to kill on its own, but combined with cardiac issues, well, time will tell. A collective murmur rattled the linoleum floor. Dana Quince dabbed her eyes with a peppermint-patterned hanky. Who would do that to dear Harold? Chloe's stomach cramped. Harold Meeks was methodical but kind, known to sneak extra blue ribbons for children's categories. Who would want him silenced, particularly at a gingerbread contest? Sheriff Reich continued. The substance was likely ingested shortly before collapse. That puts you all in the frame. We'll need statements. Mayor Cobb stepped from the corner. Her jade suit shimmered like wrapped candy. Sheriff, the festival's reputation is at stake. May I suggest someone neutral assist? Ms. Denton here is both an architect and our defending champion. She knows the entries intimately. Chloe's head snapped towards the mayor. I'm a baker, not a detective. You're trained to identify weaknesses, angles, and... Cobb's gaze hardened. You're not from any faction in town politics. Faction. The word hung like a perishable ornament. Chloe realized Frosted Falls, beneath its frosting, was riddled with rivalries she barely understood. Something tightened in her chest, an old itch to solve structural puzzles. This time the stakes weren't property values. They were human breaths. Sheriff Reich shrugged. Unofficially, Ms. Denton, we could use fresh eyes. Walk me through the displays, note anything off. Chloe agreed, part guilt, part curiosity. Luis joined her as silent wingman. The competition hall was roped off, its air now cold, both from the deactivated heaters and the sense of violation. Flashbulbs from crime scene cameras popped. Reich handed Chloe gloves. No touching unless I clear it. Entry 1. The Balsam Bridge, by octogenarian twins, the Finleys. Chloe crouched, scanning for residue. Nothing unusual. Entry 2. Mayor Cobb's own bank replica. Impeccable piping, but nothing that screamed malice. Entry 3. Dana Quince's obliterated courthouse. She winced at the ruin, but her architect mind mapped the original structure. She noticed the faintest glimmer near the foundations, a shimmer that didn't match icing. Hold, she told Reich. Using a magnifier, she pinpointed micro beads of clear gelatin. Not royal icing, too translucent. Is this isomalt? Reich called over a tech. Sample bagged. Chloe's thoughts raced. Isomalt was common enough for windows. But Harold hadn't licked windows. He'd tasted frosting near the bell tower. She rose and checked Dana's spare frosting bags stacked under the table. One bag, half-used, nozzle crusted in pink. Another unused, sealed, but the label, Chloe noted, bore a pharmacy sticker. Diabetic sugar substitute, it read. Dana Quince was diabetic, everyone knew. She'd often touted her low glycemic icing. Chloe's heart thudded. A sugar substitute could mask chemicals if one knew which to pick. She bit her lip. Evidence or coincidence? Moving on, she stopped at her own railway depot. She tried seeing it like a stranger would. Cocoa ballast, licorice tracks. Pristine. No spilled powders. She turned toward Luis. Everything you touched, did it include Harold's samples for tasting earlier in the day? Luis shook his head. Meeks only tasted randomly after 3 p.m. I was delivering cocoa to volunteers then. Chloe filed that away. Entry 6 belonged to hardware store owner Jeff Barrow, a hulking gingerbread water tower whose ginger slats aligned with engineer precision. Chloe gingerly lifted a fallen gumdrop. Underneath lay a speck of blue powder. She called the tech again. By midnight, she'd flagged 5 oddities and a potential pattern. The anomalies existed only in entries whose creators had clashed with Meeks recently, over zoning proposals, funding disputes, or festival rules. A vendetta list as long as a licorice whip. But which anomaly laced Harold's bite? Sheriff Reich yawned. We'll wait for lab work. Get sleep, Miss Denton. Sleep never arrived. At 4 a.m., Chloe sat at her kitchen counter, sketching the contest layout. She drew Meeks's path, each taste, the order in which he moved. As she plotted, she noticed he'd paused longest at the courthouse, both to evaluate and to chat with Dana, who'd been describing her sugarless icing. 30 seconds later, he collapsed. She scribbled chemical names beside each suspect sugar substitute: xylitol, erythritol, aspartame, which could act as a carrier for a paralytic. Architecture turned to chemistry. She opened her laptop, scanning scholarly articles. Some sugar alcohols precipitated quicker in moisture, useful for quick-release concoctions. Was the killer that educated? At dawn, Louise stumbled into the kitchen, hair like spun sugar. "You're obsessing." "I'm calculating," Chloe corrected. "Someone engineered this." Louise set coffee on her blueprint. "You think like an architect. Buildings, stress points. But people aren't beams. They bend." She sipped, feeling warmth spread. "Harold never should have been targeted. I have to finish this build." A ring cut through. Reich. Meeks woke long enough to whisper something. Words sounded like columns. Then he seized again. Columns. Chloe flashed to Dana's courthouse, to Jeff's water tower slats, vertical sticks like columns, and to her own depot's portico. But Harold had collapsed before tasting anything beyond Dana's. Columns had to reference the courthouse design, or Dana herself. At 9, Chloe joined Reich for town interviews. First up, Dana Quince. She sat in her bakery, red-rimmed eyes, shelves behind her half empty. Chloe scanned for medications. Dana admitted she kept insulin needles in the back fridge. She swore she'd never harm Harold, claiming he'd mentored her after her father died. When told of Harold's muttered columns, Dana sobbed harder. Daddy was a mason. He loved columns. Harold always mentioned him when he saw my miniature courthouse. Next, they questioned Jeff Barrow at the hardware store. He radiated sleep deprivation, sawdust misting his flannel. "Harold cost me a permit last spring," he growled, filling birdseed bags. "Town said my roof sign was unsafe proportions." He cracked sunflower shells between molars. But he'd been across the hall selling hot cider during judging, with witness accounts. Even so, Chloe noticed sugar crystals on his cuff. They moved to Mayor Cobb's office. The mayor maintained composure, but her hands fidgeted with a brass candy cane paperweight. "Harold opposed my downtown revitalization grant," she confessed. "But do you honestly think I'd poison him in public? Bad optics." Chloe asked if the grant involved the courthouse building. Cobb hesitated. "We considered repurposing it as a microbrewery. Harold cherished its original facade, those columns." She exhaled. "You see what you want in that word. Be careful." Snow started falling, thick as sifted powdered sugar. Reich canned the day's rounds. Chloe trudged home, brain cramping. She collapsed onto the couch and sprang back up. Columns could be literal or chemical. Columns, chromatography columns, used in labs to separate compounds. Had Harold tried to say colloids? Unlikely. No, chromatography column, part of GCMS machines. Who owned such? The town pharmacy had a small unit for compounding steriles. Chloe rushed to her car. At Meyer's pharmacy, she found owner-pharmacist Gwen Meyer refilling shelves. Chloe, breathless, asked if anyone had requested unusual reagents recently. Gwen checked logs. Yesterday morning, Jeff Barrow bought propylene glycol, said he needed it to winterize his RV pipes. That's normal. But Mayor Cobb's aide picked up a diacetyl-free butterflavor sample. Gwen frowned. "And Dana purchased polyglycetol syrup last week, though she's used that forever. Propylene glycol, it was nothing. Butter flavor, innocent." Chloe sighed. She was chasing sugar dust. She thanked Gwen and left. Driving back, exhaustion blurred edges. At a red light, she stared at a demolition sign outside the old county library. Collins and Sons Demolition. Collins, columns. Could Harold's word have been Collins? Her pulse kicked. 40 minutes before judging, she'd overheard Harold arguing on his cell. Collins can't just tear it down. She'd dismissed it, busy lacing licorice. If the demolition company threatened a building Harold loved, he'd fight, and maybe someone decided to silence him. But who had ties to Collins and Sons? Chloe parked, pulled her coat tighter, and marched into Town Hall Records. The clerk, a Gingerbread fan, let her browse. She located a demolition request. Collins and Sons, contracted by Barrow Hardware, to raise an abandoned grain silo outside town, the real-life twin of Jeff's water tower Gingerbread. Permit denied by Harold Meeks last month for safety reasons. Motive enough? Maybe. But the timeline wobbled. Jeff had a partial alibi, plus Harold collapsed at Dana's piece. Unless Jeff sabotaged Dana's icing, making it look like a rival's disastrous accident. Chloe strode to the contest hall again. The scene was released. She approached Dana's broken courthouse, scanning the floor. A glint behind a table leg, a metal coupler from a piping bag, etched initials. J.B. Her heart hammered. She pocketed it, then thought better, photographed, and called Reich. They met at the station. The sheriff compared the coupler to Jeff's equipment. An identical set minus the missing piece lay in Jeff's baking kit. Confronted, Jeff stiffened. "I loaned that coupler to Dana," he protested. "She said she'd forgotten hers." Dana, summoned, shook her head vigorously. "Never borrowed anything from Jeff in my life." Seated across from each other, the two hurled frosted accusations. Reich pinched his sinuses. Chloe paced, reviewing. Jeff had motive, demolition permit denial, and opportunity during judging when people milled about. But Dana had proximity to Harold, custom sugar substitutes, and a potential inheritance from Harold. No, that was absurd speculation. She closed her eyes, visualizing flows. If Jeff wanted Harold dead yet framed Dana, he'd need access to her icing. He could loan a coupler pre-tainted inside with a paralytic powder miscible in sugar alcohol. Once Dana screwed it onto her bag and frosted final decorative accents, the poison would be inside the piped scrolls Harold inevitably tasted. Her eyes snapped open. "Sheriff, test the interior of the coupler threads." Lab results within hours confirmed trace residue of tetrodotoxin, a highly potent marine neurotoxin, not something a small-town baker would source casually. Tetrodotoxin dissolved readily in polyol syrups like polyglycitol, Dana's diabetic icing base. Reich confronted Jeff again. Under pressure, Jeff confessed partial truth. He'd ordered a research chemical online, angry about the grain silo permit. But he'd only meant to give Harold a scare, perhaps mild illness, not cardiac arrest. He'd coated the inside of the coupler, convinced Dana would use it and Harold would get queasy, thus discrediting Harold's judgment on structural matters. His voice cracked. "I miscalculated the dose." Dana burst into tears, equal parts relief and fury. Chloe felt her shoulders slump, a bitter ache mixing with satisfaction. She'd been right about engineered weakness. Jeff Barrow was taken into custody, charges pending. Snow still fell when Chloe walked home, Louise waiting on her porch with 2 steaming mugs of mulled cider. She recounted the confession. He whistled. "You really iced out the suspects." She managed a tired laugh. "I just followed the stress lines." They sat on the steps, silence settling like sugar dust. Across town, ambulance sirens were replaced by the soft toll of church bells. Harold Meeks had stabilized. He would live, though the town's innocence might not recover as quickly. Luis raised his mug. To gingerbread villages that survive their architects. Chloe clinked crockery. And to rebuilding stronger, cookie or otherwise. In the window of her shop, the model railway depot still glowed. Tomorrow she would repair Dana's shattered courthouse, piece by sugared piece, and display it beside her own. Gingerbread, like people, could be rebuilt with enough patience, and a decent mortar of icing. Tonight, though, she let the cold, crisp air surround her, stinging yet pure. She'd reclaimed her knack for buttressing fragile things, be they confections or communities. Somewhere in the swirl of snow and streetlight, Frosted Falls breathed again, sweet and sharp, a place where even broken sugar columns might one day stand proud.